Good morning. We're going to get started here just in a second. I know we have a couple quick questions people are asking, and we'll give you just another minute to hop on, but we'll be starting in another minute. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Manufacturer and Business Association's virtual member engagement briefing. Today, we're going to talk about gender communications, more commonly known as he said, she said. We'll give you tips on how to best communicate with the opposite sex, and I will be taking lots of notes, Megan. Now, my name is Patty Welther, and I'm on staff here at the association. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that we're recording today's webinar. It will be available. I do send it back out again. So if I don't send it to you right away and you want it, please shoot me an email. I also want to remind you that your microphones are muted. And if you do have questions, please ask in the chat box. It's up in the upper corner, or you can raise your hand as well. And Megan is much more well-versed in Teams than I am, so she'll be a little prompter than I am on these things, but I will keep an eye in the chat box as well. Now, if you've participated in these briefings in the past, you may remember, or maybe you won't, that I do discuss a benefit of membership. And today I want to just talk about some of the training programs that are available, as Megan is one of our contract instructors. As you can see, we have a lot of training classes in a lot of different fields. Many people know us for things like supervisory and leadership programs, but Megan teaches a lot of communication and marketing classes. She also teaches our Women in Leadership class, which is one of our more popular offerings. We also offer computer classes and quality, safety, a whole variety of different offerings for our members to take advantage of. We teach them at the conference center in Erie. We teach them in Pittsburgh. We teach them regionally, and we also teach them virtually. And here is a listing of some of our virtual classes that will be taking place this July. Many of them are Megan's classes. They're very easy to take. It's similar to this format. And if you want a little bit more information, please feel free to reach out to any of us here at the association, or just click into our website at mbausa.org. But before I get started, I did want to introduce Megan. Megan is a rock star. She can do everything, but she is one of our contract instructors, and she has been with the association since 2005. She's the owner of Duda Digital Marketing, and she previously taught and shared at Mercyhurst Communications Marketing Department. She has more than 20 years of experience with both marketing and PR for companies throughout our area. Things like healthcare, she's worked in government, higher education, and social services. Her current business provides strategic marketing services for various companies throughout our region. And like I said, she teaches a lot of our classes. And without further ado, Megan.
Great, thanks, Patty.
Sure.
And with 20 years of experience, I started when I was 10, I'm pretty sure.
Wait, and she really did. But I'm turning my camera off now.
Hey. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Because of time, I want to make sure that we are going to get through all of the stuff today. I will tell you, and Patty had mentioned that some of this content is provided in a couple of different classes that I teach. So we talk about gender communication in many of the communication classes at the MBA, including workplace communication, and of course in my Women in Leadership class as well. But what my goal of today is to be able to provide you some insight into gender communications, and then talk about just some general communication differences at the end. At the very end of today's class, I'm going to give you 3 tips that no matter whether you're communicating with the same gender or a different gender, they will be helpful for you. So let's go ahead and get started. And please, like Patty had mentioned, if you're just joining us, you can drop any questions into the chat. I'll pause a couple of different times here to respond to them. My contact information is up on the screen, but you can also, like Patty had said, I've been with the MBA as a contract trainer for a number of years. You can always reach out to them if you have any follow-up questions as well. So I want to jump in with, this is quiz time, right? On a Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I'm going to give you a test. So you can, if you like to keep score because you're competitive, which will tell me a little bit about your gender communication, you can go ahead and write down numbers 1 to 13 because there's going to be 13 true and false questions. If you just want to mentally keep score, you can do that too. So let's jump in. What these 13 questions are, is to get some insight into gender communications of maybe some of the things, the biases, the myths, the misnomers that you might have heard throughout your lifetime. So let's see. Number 1, men talk more than women. Do you think that's true or false? And again, we're just keeping our own personal score. So true or false, men talk more than women. And the answer is actually true. This is a huge misnomer. A lot of people think women talk more than men, when in fact men talk more than women. They actually, if you count the number of words given on an average day, men have more. Women use different words. So they have a larger vocabulary, which is where the misnomer comes in, but men actually talk more. Number 2, men are more likely to interrupt women than they are to interrupt other men. So men are more likely to interrupt women than they are to interrupt other men. And that's actually true as well. And it has to do with the way that they communicate, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. It's not a women thing. Number 3, women tend to confront problems more directly and are likely to bring up the problem first. And this is a misnomer because a lot of people think that women don't want to get involved in conflict, when in fact, the relationship building aspect of the feminine communicators is higher. And so they want to be able to jump in and have that conversation. So it's true. Number 4, during conversation, men spend more time looking at their partner than women do. Men spend more time making eye contact or looking at their partner than women do. And the answer is false. We'll talk about the lack of eye contact from masculine communicators here in a bit, but women or feminine communicators tend to make more eye contact than the males or masculine communicators. Number 5, groups that use the style of sticking to the task, so more task driven, get more work done. And this is a little bit of a misnomer because a lot of people think that if we stick to the task, if we just stay on task and make constant progress, we'll get more done. When in fact, and that's a very masculine style of communication, but when in fact, more relational or more cooperative work actually becomes more efficient, especially in a longer term project. Number 6, in general, men and women talk about the same things. I think we might all know that's false. Masculine and feminine communicators tend to not only talk about things differently, but they tend to talk about different things. And we'll talk about that here in a second too. Number 7, women use less personal space than men do. And the answer is true. And this becomes an issue in communication because some of our nonverbal language sends messages. The amount of space, and this might be interesting to some of you, the amount of space that you take up actually signals a leadership position within the organization. And so if I take up lots of space, people will, from a nonverbal perspective, look at me as being someone who is in leadership. So if I'm taking up more space, if I'm making myself bigger, it actually sends the messages of being important or having prominence within that room. And I'm not giving you permission to spread your stuff out all over the conference room table at your next meeting. It's just one of those little data points. Number 8, when a man speaks, he's listened to more carefully than a woman, even if the presentation is identical. And the answer is true. And for those of us who are faculty members who happen to be female gender, this is hard because we can have, and there's been lots of studies done, a male partner and myself, a female communicator, communicating the exact same class, and his rankings are always going to be higher. In fact, so much so that the national survey data of faculty and teachers skew the scales for male and female evaluations because women are rated lower, regardless if the presentation is identical. Number 9, men appreciate jokes more than women. And the answer is true. Men, masculine communicators, use joking as part of their communication style. Women tend not to do that. And so when men are joking around and our female communicators are saying, "Why are you joking around all the time?" It's because men are using that as part of their communication style. And women don't necessarily do that. So it's different. And we might have a harder time understanding why we would be doing that. Number 10, in general, men smile more often than women. This is false. They tend to smile the same amount. This also comes from a misnomer that women are always serious. And again, going back to the guys are always joking around. And the answer is actually not true. We tend to smile the same amount. Number 11, in general, women speak in a more tentative style than men do. And this is true. And we're going to talk about hedging language and why that's something that women or female communicators want to potentially overcome, because that hedging language can come across not exactly in the way that we want it to. Number 12, women are more likely than men to disclose personal information. And most of my students get this right. That is true. Women tend to come from a personal base, more emotional base, whereas men come from more logical base. Number 13, women are more likely than men to answer questions that are not addressed to them. And it's false. So one of the misnomers is that women will jump in and answer everybody's questions because we like to talk more maybe, but when in fact we do so equally. So both men and women, if we have the answer, are willing to give that information. So my question is, how well did you do? No accountability, so you don't need to drop it into the chat. But I think that we would all say, unless you've taken this quiz somehow before, many of us have misnomers that are just based on what we've heard, and they're not necessarily true. So what my job today is I'm going to go through a handful of slides and some misnomers and some insights into the way masculine and feminine communicators communicate, and hopefully give you not only some insight, but some practical tips that you can take away from today. And what's the goal here? The goal is to be able to better communicate, not just with the opposite gender, but also with the same gender, just in general, having better communication. And one of the first steps, regardless of what the topic of communication is, one of the first steps to being able to better understand why people communicate in the way that they do, and you can write this down, is to use more question marks and less periods. We tend to, when we don't understand why someone's communicating in the way they do, we tend to start making more statements. We tend to dig our heels in a little bit more. And one of the tips that we'd all be well served by is to be able to ask more questions to be able to better understand them. And just the fact that you guys are on today's call tells me that you're starting to ask some more questions. You want to understand maybe where some of the communication breakdown is coming from. So let's get started with some terminology. And we'll start with sex and gender, right? Who doesn't want to talk about sex? Of course, and gender, good stuff. Many of us confuse these two things, and we say male and we say masculine, and we think they mean the same thing, when in fact they do not. Sex refers to biological differences. So when we talk about the word male and female, we're talking about the physical differences that make us male or female. There are actually brain differences, chemical differences, the way that our brains are literally wired, that change the way that we communicate. On the other hand, gender refers to masculine versus feminine. And so when we talk about gender implications, you can be biologically a male and be a feminine communicator. You can be biologically a female and be a masculine communicator, and every combination in between, because with gender, there are spectrums. There's masculine spectrum and there's feminine spectrum. And so you could be a high masculine communicator and a high feminine communicator, and that makes you what we call androgynous. You use both strengths of masculine communication to be able to communicate. There's also some of us that are low masculine and low feminine, and that's what we call, I just totally blanked. That's what we call atypical or asynchronous, meaning you can be both masculine and feminine, but you don't necessarily leverage either of the strengths. And so when I run into people that score low on both masculine and feminine, I encourage them to take hold of one of the types, because a lot of times what happens with that is they don't communicate at all. So they tend to be a little bit more passive in meetings and things like that. So I want to explain the difference here, because when we're talking today, I'm going to give you a handful of slides. We're going to start out with some gender communication. I'm going to be really specific about what I'm talking about. This is a biological difference. This is a cultural difference. Now, a lot of people say, well, this is all culturally applied. Well, this is all biologically applied. All I'm going to say, because we only have, 45 minutes on today's call, there's a lot of research around this, and it's both and. It's both biological, the way our brains are wired, and the way that culture is applied. In fact, there's been studies where parents have taken their children and raised them androgynously, right? They neither masculine nor feminine in the typical culture. So you have a maybe biologically born male. And what do we think when we think biologically born male? We think blue and trucks and dinosaurs. And when we think biologically born female, we think pink and baby dolls, right? And they said, we're not going to do that. We're going to expose them to both. And here's what they found. I'm simplifying that study. They found that regardless, that our culture is so strong that those gender differences still occur. And so it's both nature and nurture. So when we talk about masculine and feminine right here, I am talking about gender implications. And so again, you could be male and be high feminine communication. You could be female and be high masculine communication. So when we talk about the masculine qualities of communication, I want you to think of a couple of different things. There's two words I want to come to mind. If you're a masculine communicator, you are going to approach communication in a very logical way. Okay. And so again, this doesn't mean that female or feminine communicators are illogical or irrational is the word that we hear often. That's not what we're talking about. By logical, it's fact, data, and very black and white. So one or the other, not there's some gray in between. And so masculine communicators are very logical in their communication, and they're also very task first, people second. Okay. Task first, people second. If I put a task on the table, my masculine communicators are going to figure out the shortest, most efficient way to go from point A to point B to get that task accomplished. And why is that? Well, look at the list of items that masculine communicators utilize to communicate. They use reason and they use logic, they use ranking, competing, they're focusing on a team. Okay. And the think, again, it's not an implication that feminine communicators aren't thinking. It's just, it's all up here and not here in the heart, right? It's not the emotional side. They will always bend more toward the mindset. Show me the data, show me the numbers, show me the analytics. And again, that's needed. But on the other side, we have feminine communicators who, and again, I'll give you two things here, communicate more relationally, or you'll hear the word emotionally. And then the second thing is they are always people first, task second. So people first, task second. So that same task is put on the table. And the feminine communicators, again, not confused with female versus male, the feminine communicators will attempt to solve the problem by encouraging and empowering the people around them through relationships. You'll hear things like, well, if we pour into them, they will rise to the occasion. On the other side, masculine, you'll hear things like, if we pour money into them, if we give resources to this, we'll be able to do it more efficiently. Feminine communicators will say things along the lines of, it's about the process, not even necessarily about accomplishing the task. Masculine communicators say it's about accomplishing the task, and the people will come along with that. They should be able to rise to the occasion. Feminine communicators tend to lean into more empathy. They tend to have focus more on the relationships that are being built. They're looking at creating a group, and they're using more intuition, which now imagine you're sitting at the table with a masculine communicator and a feminine communicator. The masculine communicator's base is logic, right? So the numbers and the data, and feminine communicators is more intuition. And so they're having a conversation about solving this problem, and feminine communicators will use words like I feel, I think, and it's not this think, it's taking into consideration all of what's there, my gut instinct says, and to a masculine communicator, that you can't put on paper. That's not black and white. There's no data to support that necessarily. And so masculine communicators will dismiss the feminine communicator. On the other side, the masculine communicator saying, look at this data. Here's the analytics. And the feminine communicator is looking at the data and saying, but where's the context? Where are the people in this data? And this is statistics, but there's outliers here that we need to consider, right? You can imagine just in that simple application, that simple example, where the breakdown comes in, because right out of the gate, both of them can dismiss the other because they don't understand the value that both of those bring. By the by, if you're more of a masculine communicator, you might be saying intuition. Who makes business decisions on intuition? I would challenge you, and I can provide this to you if you want after today's call. There is actually research studying intuition, especially among seasoned individuals who have worked with organizations, about the benefits of intuition, because they might not be able to put their finger on the data, but the combination between what they remember, their experiences, and their heart, the emotion of it, that intuition actually is accurate quite frequently. So if you're interested in that research after, because you're nerdy like me, I can find that. But just again, for the masculine communicators who are trying to dismiss the intuition, it's actually pretty accurate. Okay, with that, let's sit in a boardroom now and look at what might be happening, or a conference room, what might be happening between these masculine and feminine communicators. And so masculine communicators are viewing conversations as an information exchange. Both my son and I, so I'm biologically female and I'm high masculine communication. My son is biologically male and high masculine communication. My husband, biologically male, feminine communication. He's observing this conversation between my son and I, both masculine. My son's getting ready to move out, first job, yay, right? So he's moving to Jacksonville and we're trying to get an apartment and trying to get all the details set up here. And the conversation went something like this. He says, got an apartment. I said, that's great. Did you sign the lease? Yes, I did. That's great. Back and forth, back and forth. It's like a ping pong match, A, B, A, B, A, B. And we walk away at the end of the conversation. It took about 5 minutes to have basically the entire conversation about how he's moving to Jacksonville and all the details. And my husband said, that was completely not emotional. Like, what? Is he okay? Are you guys okay? Yeah, no, it's great. And so he later talks to my son, and my son's like, no, that was great. No, we're fine. We're good. We just got all the info, just details. We're just figuring out the details. He was bored because in his communication style, it's more about the person. How are you feeling about moving? What does this mean to you? Have you thought about, how these people in your life feel as well? And it's about feelings and emotion. And I don't know, I'm looking at the pictures and that doesn't look like a good place. Intuition. And so for us to have a back and forth exchange on the masculine side, we see that opportunity of conversation as an information exchange. We come together to AB exchange information. Feminine communicators view conversation, think of that like the environment, as a way to build rapport and build relationships. And again, from the masculine side, when you're looking at the feminine side and saying, well, that's a waste of time. Why do we need to build relationships? Everybody should just be doing their job. Again, back to the more research, because I have to appeal to the logic side of the masculine communicators. Research shows that building relationships and building rapport is actually not only a better leadership style, but it actually causes efficiencies, especially down the road. So if you're working with your team internally, having time and space to be able to build rapport and relationships is actually very valuable to the bottom line. So even though I'm a masculine communicator, please note I'm taking tips over here from that feminine communication side because there is some value. And likewise, from the feminine side, being able to pull some of the masculine traits in is really beneficial as well. Masculine communicators avoid personal information. So again, using that logic, it's all kind of on the outside. Doesn't mean that they don't want to build a relationship. They're just going to do it in a different way. Feminine communicators embrace personal topics. Let's get to know each other so that we better understand. Here's that question mark. So we better understand how we're coming to the table, why we might say things that we say in those conversations. How many times have you had where you have somebody that you're communicating with and you're like, oh, she or he is like this in a negative way. And then you get to know him or her and you're like, oh, now it all makes sense. And oh, no, I get it. They're going through some stuff. That's the feminine communication style. They understand that it's more than just data, just what's being said in that moment. It's about the context and the experience that happened up until that point. Not a bad thing to take away. So masculine, as we already talked about in our true and false quiz, tend to tell more stories and jokes. Feminine communicators process information externally for decision making. Feminine communicators tend to be more extroverted. Extroversion means that you get your energy from being around people and you tend to process externally. Masculine communicators tend to be more introverted, meaning they process information inside their head, and what comes out when they do talk is kind of a fully baked idea, and they tend to get their energy from being alone and isolated, dealing with the data, right? Again, these are paradoxes. They're not necessarily true of everyone, but it gives us some context. And so feminine communicator comes into a room and they want to process, and the masculine communicator looks at the feminine communicator and says, why do you continue to talk about this? We've already decided. Or why are you talking to me about this and all these ideas? Like, just make a decision and move on. But that is the way that they're processing. What masculine communicators sometimes don't realize is you're doing the same thing. You're just doing it with your mouth closed. You're able to kind of process it inside here. The feminine communicator processes it externally. Neither one of them is right or wrong. When you're processing internally, it doesn't leave a lot of room for people to speak into it. And when you're processing externally, a lot, sometimes people aren't ready to process with you, or they don't have all of the information, but processing externally allows other people to speak into it. So direct, blunt for the masculine communicators, they will swear and use slang. I hear from a lot of feminine communicators that I coach. They'll say, oh my gosh, his or her language is just so foul. And that actually comes along with the masculine communication. Now, listen, if you are swearing or using inappropriate slang, never appropriate for the workplace. You can't play the masculine communication card here. But sometimes people are wondering why that's part of the vocabulary, why that's part of the way that they communicate. And it's because feminine communicators tend to be more indirect and use more courtesy words. And again, from the masculine to feminine, a lot of times they'll look at the feminine communicators and tell them that they're too soft. You're too nice. And again, they're trying to build that relationship. And so that's really important to them. Masculine communicators share information. Feminine communicators share gossip. Now listen, gossip, and it has a bad connotation in this context. We should not gossip, meaning getting information third hand. When I'm talking about gossip here, number one, feminine communicators do need to stop gossiping. I talk about that in my Women in Leadership class, because gossip does not help the organization move forward. That's sharing information that does not have a factual or informed basis. But gossip is about sharing information. And so if we put this into a different context, masculine communicators tend to only share what's needed, whereas feminine communicators want to put as much on the table as possible so that everyone has the information they need to do their job. And so again, gossip, not okay, but putting information on the table, being transparent and giving information that people can utilize in their day-to-day decisions is actually a really valuable characteristic. Masculine communicators tend to lecture, more periods, less question marks. Feminine communicators tend to listen. They're asking more questions, less periods. Masculine communicators see conflict as a way to establish status. We'll talk about the devil's advocate rule here in a second. You'll see how this comes into play. Whereas feminine communicators trying to build agreement, a source of community, or a sense of community. Masculine communicators, because they use conflict, poke at ideas and tend to make the idea stronger, because in the internal community, right, around the boardroom table, around the conference room table, an idea gets put on the table, and the masculine communicators are going to say, well, have you thought about this? Well, what about this? We'll have, what's the alternative? What else can we do? And they're trying to get this idea, and I call it fully baked, but to a point where you feel like it's strong and there's nothing else that people could ask that would break it down. We've thought of all of the things. Feminine communicators, and here's a disadvantage of this style, can be a disadvantage. Feminine communicators, in their intent to build community and not to make people feel bad, will not want to stir the pot or stir up conflict. And so when someone says, well, have you thought about this? Sometimes what can happen is that idea, instead of making it stronger, it starts to break apart, because it's like, okay, well, yeah, we can concede here, we can concede there, because you want to build that relationship. Sometimes that's a good strategy, especially when you're trying to build a relationship. That's the intent. We're trying to build relationship on the team. But it also can be a disadvantage because what can happen is this idea that was really solid has now gotten broken apart and has been compromised because we don't want to offend someone. We don't want to not build relationship in this opportunity. And so the combination of the two, as you're probably picking up, the combination of masculine and feminine styles, and when to use those styles in particular situations. Think about having those tools in your tool belt, being able to pull them out at the right time and be able to leverage them at the right time, and having the discernment to know this isn't the right time to tell the joke or use foul language, or it's not the time to build community. We need to get the task done, or we need to not talk about personal topics right now. We need to get down to business. Having that discernment, that emotional intelligence is really important here because both of them bring strengths and both of them have weaknesses in the communication world. So let's talk about how this plays out in the business world. And I'm using a male biological, right? So there's the sex again, using male imagery and female imagery, just so that our minds kind of stay on that track. But this is masculine communicators, feminine communicators, and I will tell you when there's some biological differences as we go through the slides. So how do these two styles work out in the workplace, and what can we take away from them? On the left-hand side, we're talking about status or the lens that we look at things through. And we've already mentioned some of these pieces. Masculine communicators look intentionally for differences to achieve status. So they're looking in the workplace. If we're having a conversation and I'm a masculine communicator, I might be looking for differences between us to say, oh, I did this or I did that. And it's trying to rank. And again, it's not because they have an intention of putting you down. It's about where do we fit in the scheme of things. And once that's established, who's the decision maker in this? Because again, efficiency and task are important for them. That's when they feel settled or able to move forward. The problem with that, as you can imagine, especially look at the female communication first bullet point, they're trying to look for similarities. So imagine sitting across from someone, I'm trying to look for differences, you're trying to look for similarities. The conversation's not going to start very well, is it? And so right out of the gate, there's some differences. So the masculine communicators looking to one up, they see giving orders as being higher status, taking orders as lower status. And so again, from a status standpoint, this masculine communicator is trying to make sure that they are known in the organization. They have to be very careful. If you're a masculine communicator, you need to be very careful here, because when you break down relationships and when all you're focused on is achieving status, you're not going to have many followers left, even if you do rise in the ranks. And so there is something to be said about the building relationships of the feminine communicators. The feminine communicators are looking for similarities to achieve connection so that we understand that we have each other's back, that we're part of a group. And they're really trying to achieve equality, and they're trying to help other people understand. And again, it's not that, the CEO of the company is at the same level and has the same decision-making authority as the lowest ranking person in your organization. But what it does mean is helping people understand that they have an important part of this team or the organization as a whole. So from the masculine side, building connections, masculine communicators tend to use playful insults and teasing to build connections. And it is not okay all the time to do that, especially when the other individual, I don't care if they're a male or a female, says this isn't okay, that it doesn't, you can't play again. You can't play the masculine communicator card and say, oh, that's just me being me. That's just me communicating. Can't do that. We can play, we can tease professionally, but when the other individual says that's enough, or when you're reading nonverbal clues and they say that's enough, it's enough. But it helps us understand that this is part of our culture. Part of our culture is masculine communicators playing and teasing to build a relationship. It's not always okay, but it helps give us an understanding of why they're doing it. It's not necessarily even to be hurtful. In their way, that's their skill of building relationship. Might need change depending on what they're doing to playfully insult or playfully tease. But it's really related to the status dimension. Again, they're teasing there's a little bit of status in there, right? To put one person down and build the other person up, not okay. But it also can just be, again, to build that relationship, to see kind of where everybody is in the decision-making realm. On the feminine side, feminine communicators tend to use more compliments to build relationship. And that sounds good on the surface, but sometimes the compliments are empty because we do that because we know that that helps make people feel good and build relationship. And I say, oh my gosh, Bob, you did such a good job on that. And I didn't think you did a good job, but that's just part of my tools that I pull out because it's what I was taught. Compliment. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But sometimes we need to say something. So here's an empty compliment. And the problem with that is people can actually not understand where they stand in your eyes. And especially from a supervisory standpoint, empty compliments can sometimes result in miscommunication because, well, you said I was doing a good job. Oh, I didn't really, we wouldn't say this, of course, but I didn't really mean that. But now I'm being serious. And so it can actually break down some trust. So using compliments that are sincere is never a bad thing. But we just want to make sure that that's the case. And again, there's the opposite ends of the spectrum, right? This is a spectrum. Compliment giving at one end, the extreme end of one side is empty compliments. At the other side is no compliments at all. We want to live in that middle space. This is related to the connection dimension. I want you to feel good about yourself, and I want you to see me as a source of feeling, helping you feel good about yourself. And so we're using that to help build relationship. Again, you're going to see some similarities as we go through these slides. So boys tend to play fight, and that's from a very early age. I have lots of child development literature that talks about the way that girls and boys, and this is sex. So the way girls and boys actually put their chairs, even in primary school or preschool, I think the one study was, and boys will sit next to each other. So if given a chair and saying, take your chair and go sit in a room and play with your friends, boys will sit their chairs next to each other because again, it's about team and compete and not necessarily building relationships. So I don't need to look at you, right? In order to be on a team together, we're going to sit next to each other. And girls, again, given no direction, will sit in front of each other and have the chairs facing each other to build relationship. And so when we talk about boys play fighting, we have littles in our family. My nephews and nieces are 3 and younger. And my sister-in-law said, oh my gosh, look at them. All they do is, hit each other, the boys, that is, hit each other and play and wrestle. And there is some biological ingrainedness of that in them, but there's also cultural implications. And so this sometimes does continue into adulthood, and they'll play fight. They play devil's advocate. I'm a masculine communicator, as I had mentioned before, and in my business, and my project manager loves this because she's also probably more of a masculine communicator. Some of our more creative team who tend to be more feminine in communication probably wonder why we do this. We do explain it, but I know this. So they're probably like, I don't really like this. But every time we put an idea on the table, the rule is there has to be a devil's advocate. Somebody has to tell me why, especially if I'm putting it on the table. And this is from my influence and persuasion class. If you've taken that with me, if you have high rank and high knowledge, so I've been in the marketing industry for a long time and I own my business. So if I'm putting an idea on the table, the likelihood of my staff looking at me and saying, sounds good, Megan. Yeah, let's do that is pretty high. But I also know that because I have high rank and high education in that area, I'm a specialist in that area, I'm more likely to be wrong and have a very narrow window of what should happen. And so we actually use the devil's advocate rule. And I say, you guys have to tell me why this idea, somebody has to say why this idea isn't good. And we just have embedded it as part of our culture. Masculine communicators do this. Nobody needs to tell them to do this. But the problem is, look over on the right-hand side. Feminine communicators see that devil's advocate saying, well, have you thought about this? Or is that going to work? Do you have data to support that? And feminine communicators see that as an attack personally, or an indication that you made a mistake, and they'll back down quickly. And so the masculine communicator, so imagine this, task gets put on the table, female communicators presenting it, feminine communicators presenting it. The masculine communicator, because they think it's a decent idea, starts poking holes in it because they want to make it stronger. Let's think about all the reasons that this wouldn't work so that we can add in information. We can be prepared before we go out and present it to our customers. And the masculine communicator with fully good intention steps in and says, well, have we thought about this? And the female communicator says in her head or in his head, this must be a bad idea. And they start backtracking. The masculine communicator sees that backtracking and goes, well, it must not be a good idea. And here it potentially could have been a good idea, but the difference in communication is causing the idea to break down. Instead, pro tip, masculine communicators, tell the person it's a good idea before you start saying, what have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Just simply prefacing and saying, I really like this idea, or I think this idea has some merit. Let's explore some reasons that this might not work so that we can make it stronger. Taking 2 seconds, how long did that take me? 5 seconds, 10 seconds to say that helps set the stage and the expectation from the other individual. So as we're asking questions, it's within this environment of safety. They think it's a good idea. Let's keep building on this. Let's keep asking tough questions so that we can make it even better. And again, that's just what the last bullet there says. It's not used typically as a challenge, but rather to explore possibilities. And so this is the breakdown. It's all communication. It's a breakdown in communication. We didn't ask questions. Feminine communicators, pro tip. If someone asks you that without the preface, because they didn't take this class, they just start into the questioning of the idea, ask the question. Do we think that this idea, before I answer that, before we start going down the path of why this isn't working or what could, be possibilities, do we think that this idea is something that has merit? And just simply laying the stage, you'll get a feel for what, where people are standing, and it doesn't appear, right? You start processing that, well, they don't like it, it's bad, it's an indication that, it's a personal attack on me. Just put it out on the table and ask the question. It'll help more ideas get off the ground. Feminine communicators, I'm going to talk to you. And this is a biological issue. This tends to be more female. We apologize way too much. We use apologies because somebody else ran into something over there. We'll tell them that we're sorry. We use it as hedging language to break into a conversation. We use it because we're sorry it happened to somebody. We use it because we did do something wrong. It's very confusing to all the other people who are out there. We get it, right? Of course we get it. We're using it all the time because it's just polite. Back to the polite language. But listen, our biological male counterparts and masculine communicators see an apology as disorganization and incompetence, which it's not. So something happens and I say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you didn't read my email, right? And follow through on this. I'm sorry that, I didn't send the email, which is a true apology. I'm also sorry that, like I said, you ran into the door. I'm sorry that this happened. That word, every time you say that phrase, our masculine and male counterparts are pulling that card out of I'm sorry, and they see disorganization, incompetent equals not a good leader. I don't think that many employers want to keep somebody on staff that is incompetent. And so when we keep apologizing over and over and over again, not necessarily because we truly mean we're sorry, we start racking up the incompetence points. And that's not indicative of who you are as an employee. Be very cautious with that. On the other side, and I'll stay on that for one more second. If you did something wrong, for sure, say I'm sorry, right? So if you made a mistake, if you forgot to send the email, if you really did bump into somebody, yes, say I'm sorry. I'm not telling you never to say it again. I'm just asking you to be cognizant of when you're saying it, and does it carry the same meaning of truly you are sorry that you did something, or is it more just, like I said, a break into a conversation? Instead of trying to break into a conversation with the words I'm sorry, you could try something like, I'd like to give some different insight. Instead of saying, I'm sorry that happened, or maybe even from an apology standpoint, you could thank them for their graciousness or their patience, right? So thank you so much for your patience because I was late on the email, but here's the information. The staff at the MBA are now probably laughing because I sometimes miss deadlines, and my emails tend to start with thank you for your grace. So they're probably catching on to my tricks here. Misinterpretation from the disorganization and competence. My male and masculine friends on today's call, I want you to, when people say I'm sorry, I want you to translate that as basically an empty filler, unless again, they're truly sorry that they did something. And how do you know the difference? You can ask a question. Were you, and this is awkward, right? So do you really even want to ask the question, or do we just want to default to empathy? Because if I have to say to somebody, were you at fault here? Did you actually miss this? As a leader, I might want to know that information, but in many cases, we just should give people the benefit of the doubt, maybe make a mental note of it and move on. When we're talking about from the masculine side, direct communication, so masculine style dictate orders. It's really not meant to be bossy or offensive. They just are communicating efficiently, which isn't always the best because context sometimes can help soften and help people better understand what's actually happening. So just like the conversation with my son and I, A, B, A, B, A, B, it's like a ping pong match back and forth. On the other side, feminine communicators use strategies. We actually think about trying to come across as not as bossy. And we use hedging. This is the hedging language again. Could we do this? Do you think it's possible? I would consider. And the problem with those is that they're misinterpreted by our male and masculine friends as not managerial. You're not a good leader because you're asking them, you're too soft. And this is true. It's easier to say no. So when you say, do you think it's possible? Could you maybe think about doing this? You've given me permission to basically look at you and say, no, I don't think so. I don't think I can. There are times that we need to be more assertive with our communication and to simply say what we're actually thinking or asking for. So instead of saying, could we do this? We just simply say, I would like you to do this, please. We can still use soft language. We can still be polite. We can still be professional. But if it needs to be done, then say it. If we're asking for brainstorming, then of course, do you think that this is possible? Or I would consider, but you shouldn't be married to that. And one of the things, again, I see with when I'm coaching is people say, I told them what I wanted. But when you say it in a way that I would consider, I take that from a masculine communicator standpoint as it's one option among many, and I don't have to choose that one. So if you do mean this is it, this is what I want you to choose, present that in that way. On the other side, the masculine communication style of dictating orders, being direct, is misinterpreted by our feminine and female friends as being impolite and overbearing, not good leadership qualities, not good teammate qualities. And so once again, we have the softening of the language with the masculine communicators. We do need to say, again, those please and thank yous go a long way. Or if you really aren't married to the black and white, if this is just one of your ideas, saying some of these indirect phrases, I would consider. Have you thought about asking more questions? So understand that when we're having this conversation about what we should do, and the masculine communicators coming to the table saying it's A, and the feminine communicators coming to the table saying, I think maybe we could consider this. Who's going to win in that conversation? Probably the masculine communicator, because they're more direct, it's solid, it sounds like it's well-baked idea. The problem is that's how masculine communicators, and again, I'm talking about the extreme, that's how we talk, regardless of whether we've thought it all the way through, whether we've explored all the data. And so what it can do is actually shut down conversation. If you're a leader on this call and you are a masculine, you're starting to pick up the trend that maybe you're a masculine communicator and you've had staff say they don't listen, they never take our advice, and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, I bring these questions to my team and I give them the opportunity to talk about them. They just don't disagree with me. I want you to pay attention to how you're presenting the idea to your team, because most likely the words that you're choosing to use, this is what we should do. I think this is probably shutting down conversation. And so I know that I have that tendency, which is one of the reasons I implemented the devil's advocate rule, but I'm also very, very conscious of it in my conversations, especially when I truly do want my team to participate. Likewise, on the feminine side, if you've heard, she or he does not make decisions, they're indecisive, and you're wondering why, I told you I would consider this. I gave you my opinion. You might need to firm up your language, right? I would do this, period. This is what I think we should do, period. Doesn't have to be all the time, but you need to be cognizant, conscious of that. Especially if you're hearing that language and you don't think it's accurate. Okay. When we talk about eye contact, when we talk about having communication between the two genders, I want you to look at the feminine side. Feminine communicators tend to direct face-to-face gaze. Think of those little girls that I was talking to you about, the preschoolers that put the chairs in front of each other. They're talking to each other with eye contact. And it's really about that focus, that eye contact is about building connection. Here's the breakdown. Feminine communicators look at masculine communicators, and again, I'll use males because in this case, it's strong indication or correlation with gender. So males tend to divert eye contact, and I hear from my feminine communicators, my female communicators, he's not listening. He's not even looking at me. When in fact, I mean, there's times that I'm looking at you and I'm not listening, right? So it can be that they weren't listening, but in many cases, they are listening. The direct eye contact is not innate to them. And so give them a break. Guys, on the other side, make better eye contact. It's important. On the other side, the masculine communicators avoid the eye contact and look at their feminine communicators as having this, this gaze, and it can be misinterpreted as confrontational or flirtatious, depending on, there's a couple of different eyes of eye contact. So more than 5 to 10 seconds, people start thinking that you're either into them or you want to kill them. And so neither one of those are probably what the message you're trying to send. So if you're communicating with a masculine communicator, females, feminine communicators, make sure that you're looking away every once in a while and coming back to the conversation, because it can be misinterpreted. And masculine communicators make better eye contact. On the one side, masculine communicators, quick tips. So as we wrap up this section, quick tips for masculine communicators: give compliments more freely. Female communicators tend to do this a lot. Being able to give whole compliments more freely, specific compliments, not "you're doing a good job." I've had that happen. Watched a leader say to one of the staff members, "You're doing such a great job." And they looked at them and they said, "In what?" And the leader had nothing to say, because they were just checking a box of give compliments, compliment my staff. Look for the things that your staff are doing well, compliment them on those. Or coworkers, look at things that your coworkers are doing well and compliment those as well. Use praise to temper criticism, or, like I had mentioned, set the expectation. I think this is a good idea. I just need to explore. I have a couple of questions that I want to explore to make it stronger. And maybe it's not a good idea, then don't say that, right? So if you don't think it's a good idea, you're allowed to start with that and say, "I'm not sold on the idea." So don't say your idea sucks, wrong language. Instead say, "I'm not completely sold on the idea, but I just wonder if I don't have enough information." Here's the asking questions instead of using more periods. So I'm not sold on the idea. I might just not have enough information. Let me ask a few questions so I can better understand where you're coming from. And the answer might still be, "I still don't like the idea," but at least you're giving them an opportunity to explain, and you're playing with the idea in the conversation. Asking for another's opinion to make them feel included. If you are leading a conversation, and I don't care if it's personal or around the boardroom table as a leader, when you notice that people aren't participating, you should be asking questions of what you've done to stop that communication from happening. Because if you've hired them, if your organization has brought them to the table, they have a valuable contribution. They're a piece of the puzzle that, if not asked what their opinion is, if not, if their input's not given, then you're missing this whole section. Because unless you've hired exactly the same person to do exactly the same job, everybody's contribution matters from their perspective. They have a different look at what the reality of the organization is or what the problem is. And so one of the tips that I like to say is pay attention. If you're leading a conversation, pay attention to those in the room that haven't participated and give them the opportunity to do that. Because who will dominate the conversation? The masculine communicators. And our feminine communicators are going to kind of sit back and process a little bit. They might not participate. And so simply calling on them and saying, hey, George, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Did you want to give your input from whatever George's position is from the accounting perspective? If George says no, if Mary says no from over in HR, if they say no, I think that it's being discussed, has been discussed pretty well. Take them at face value. If you notice a pattern of them not participating, it's a really good idea to, maybe have a one-on-one conversation about what's going on. And once again, I'd go back to, how are you asking the questions? How are you making your statements? So do a little bit of self-reflection as well. So I'll leave us with this, and this is a typology test that I do in most of my communication classes, talking about different styles of communication. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. You can read the slide as I'm talking if you want to. There are four main types of communicators. Direct style, talkative style are two of them, warriors and visionaries. And I want to present this to you. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into this to tease you into the Women in Leadership class and workplace communication class, but also because I want you to understand that gender does not explain all of our differences. That regardless of gender, we also have a personality, we also have our own experiences. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of flavor to show you some differences. You might have heard of DISC assessment. That would help explain some of the communication differences as well. And it fits actually pretty well with this, or the Enneagram style. But it's also just, I've experienced that this way of communicating has worked well for me. And I'm not really sure what style is, because it crosses across all four of these boxes, or all the different both of the different genders. So just, again, I'm presenting this just so that you understand it's not just a gender difference. It's not males versus females. It's all of us as individuals versus, and not even versus, right? And we have all of you and all of your differences as well. But warrior style, very direct communicator, tend to be a little bit more masculine in their communication style. Poor listeners, but they definitely can make a good decision. They process internally. Why was George in accounting and Mary in HR? Because those were the names I came up with. Sorry, that was a question that just popped up. Doesn't have to be that. I know some really good HR people that are males, if that's what you're asking, versus some people in accounting. Actually, all the people at Mercyhurst I worked with in accounting were female. So warriors, being the direct style, they want freedom, power, and independence. They tend to walk into a room and people look at them and think they are in charge, even if they're not, because they just kind of have that presence. Visionaries are my Disney thinkers. They suffer from shiny object syndrome. They get distracted easily. They love to talk. They tend to work in sales. They have lots of friends, but don't spend inordinate amounts of time with them because they're moving on to the next thing, but they like to have fun as well. They like influence, popularity, public recognition. So you can imagine warriors might be more task focused, where visionaries are more people focused. Nurturers, more people focused as well, more sincere style. They tend to be the huggers. They like to have long conversations about you. You can have an entire conversation with a nurturer and not have them talk one time about themselves. They're loyal. They have a small group of friends that they've known since childhood. They like to build roots, feel accepted. They tend to also like to talk too much, and they're very tentative in their decision making. Critical thinkers, T-crossers, I-dotters, they tend to be more actuaries and accountants. They are data-driven people, long memos. They want to see all the possibilities. And I'll give you one pro tip. If you're communicating with critical thinkers, they tend to be the devil's advocates. If they share, they tend to sit back and kind of watch things happen because they don't necessarily like conflict, but they tend to be devil's advocates. And until their questions of why is this important, who is this going to impact, what are the specific details on these things, are answered, they're not going to be able to move forward with whatever change you're implementing. Now, listen, I do this in my classes, and this is a literally 2-minute overview of these types. I'm just telling you, as you can see, that all four of these are very different. You probably identified yourself just as I'm describing them. You might have identified yourself in this. You might have also identified what I like to call your least preferred coworker in these as well. And you're like, oh gosh, why can't they be more warrior like me? Or why can't they be more critical thinker like somebody else? The problem with this is all four types are needed, and both masculine and feminine communicators are needed in our organization, because without them, we would be missing a piece. And so one of the tips that I'd like to give you is the platinum rule. And the platinum rule, we know the golden rule, treat others like you would want to be treated, great rule. Communicate with others, right? Like you would want to be communicated with breaks down though, because if I communicate with you, I'm a warrior, I'm a direct communicator, I'm a masculine communicator. Now let's say that you're a feminine communicator. You are more of a nurturer, like to have conversations about personal relationships. And I come in and I say ABCD, and you say she doesn't like me, right? It starts breaking down. The golden rule, if I communicate with you the way I want to be communicated with, it doesn't work. So we follow the platinum rule. What you want to do is get to know the people that you're communicating with, ask them questions about how they want to be communicated with, saying, do you think that we need some relationship building on the front end? One of the great examples that I like to give is when we were doing Dial for Dollars. I work in fundraising, so the Dial for Dollars, and I said to the team, I like to make my calls by myself because I'm a warrior, introverted, direct, by myself. And I said to the team, do you guys want to do it together or do you want to do it separately? Because that's an option. And I had several people say, no, we would love to come together and do it together. And the results were better than the year before because they were together. And so I have to be able to know the person so that I can communicate in a way that resonates with them. Bias, realize that everyone, and it's not bias in the way that you might think, bias in terms of everybody's coming in with a different idea of experiences and different idea of what happened in the past, and know that they have those and that they're working on overcoming those, and so are you, right? And so when we come into a conversation, I'm biased based on my experiences, and I'm going to communicate in a little bit of a different way. And then finally, framing. Realize that you don't have all of the information. When I take a snapshot of the conversation I'm communicating with you, I'm leaving information out and I'm choosing to include certain information. So realize that these communication complications have nothing to do with gender. They're things that we have to keep working on. And if you're interested in these or more information on gender communication, we have a couple of awesome classes that you can jump into. Supervisory skills, women in leadership, workplace communication are all really good starting places. So with that, I think Patty might be jumping on here at the end. I'm going to answer a couple of these questions if you want to hang out. If not, we're happy to email you any information that might have been asked for. Like Anne, a copy of the PowerPoint. I'm okay with that. Patty's going to send out a recording, I think, after this.
I am. I'm going to send the recording out. Wonderful job. We've got all kinds of great comments from people. I know that your women in leadership class is coming up in July 23rd. Is your workplace communications as well scheduled this summer?
I do believe it is, and I would be happy to provide you with the link so you can send, or the date, so you can send it out as well.
Great. I can send that with the other link. And thank you everyone for attending. If you have questions, you want to sign up for any of the classes, you can go to our website at mbausa.org. We hope to see you next month. We're going to talk about COVID work issues. Work Partners will be talking about how to manage some of those conversations with your employees as either you're coming back to work or some of the issues residing around COVID work issues. And that will take place on Tuesday, July 20th from 9 to 10 a.m. Hope to see you then. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.